everyone, my name is Luna, and to my surprise, I noticed that on YouTube there is only chapter 1 and chapter 2 from Manga in Theory and Practice, and so I purchased the digital book, and for learning purposes, I would like to read to you chapter 3 today. So let me just get started. I'm trying to load my PDF. It's actually very slow. But yeah, if you're a learning mangaka, I hope this helps you, and I hope it's not too annoying or slow. The way I read, I'm not really that good at reading, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, let's just get started. So, chapter 3, The Golden Way to Making Protagonists. So, TLDR, chapter 3 is about character design. Of the 4 fundamentals, characters are supreme. If you have effective characters in place, you will be undefeatable. Taken to the extreme, this means that compelling characters negate the need for story or setting. That's how incredibly important they are. Some mangaka will go as far as to say that if you have characters, you have a manga. Here's a little quiz. I'm going to describe a character. He has an honest heart when faced with a situation where others would lose spirit. He remains optimistic and overcomes the challenge. He has a sense of justice, cares for his friends, and he is a master of martial arts. His signature technique is the Kamehameha. By now, I'm sure you know I'm talking about Goku. Take this simple character perfectly suited for shonen manga and pair it with Akira Toriyama's art and you get Dragon Ball. Here's another example. He lacks off at work and cares only for his pastimes, but he has a razor-sharp focus and he never goes halfway. He's a policeman in a working class part of Tokyo. That this is recognizable as Ryo-san is testament to Kochikame's position as a masterwork. That such a short, basic description can call the character to mind may seem like no big deal, but it is a huge deal that all the author has to do is come up with a situation for Ryo-san, and that's enough to write the next chapter. Not to trivialize the difficulty of keeping it up for 40 years. Very important as a note. You do have to make a lot of situations for these characters and draw them for a long time. Funny. But you mustn't simply copy another character no matter how quintessential that character may be. For example, I'll base a character on Goku, an optimistic youth who cares for his friends, never gets discouraged no matter how big or small the challenge, and is a kickboxer with the signature move called Kozen Keri, light beam kick. This is not a character that will appeal to readers because Goku already exists as an establishing character, and no rehash will ever seem fresh. But that leaves an obvious question. How can you make an appealing character without imitating another? What does your character want to do? Once you've been convinced that the characters are incredibly important and that you mustn't imitate established character, the next step before you begin drawing is to form a mental image of your characters with all the necessary pieces in place. The most important part of a character is their motivation. What does your protagonist want to accomplish? If you can't clearly communicate their motives through their actions, he or she is not a complete character. It's crucial that you will be able to illustrate why your characters act the way they do. If you leave your characters' motives vague, your readers won't be able to empathize with them. Returning to Dragon Ball's Goku as an example, his motivation is to become stronger and stronger. It's a simple motivation that's easy to understand and has been shared by every boy, which then makes them room for a deeper examination. Why does he want to become stronger? What will he do when he does? Because of this, readers can connect to the character and share the emotional highs and lows. When it comes to creating characters, it may seem natural to begin with their personalities, but you have to be able to show the readers within the first or maybe second page what purpose the character possesses for being in the story. If your main character is a superhero, start by considering why the character became a superhero. If the characters are acting like a superhero without having a clear motive, the reader's first reaction will be, what the hell is this character doing? And they won't come along for the story. Make sense? The motivation would be anything. His parents were killed by evildoers. He wants to get a woman. She has a fatal and incurable disease, and as she's going to die anyway, she might as well die a hero. Or even simply that she was bored. As you keep thinking of possible motivations, you're looking for the one that feels the strongest and most interesting to you. What makes a good motivation? Your character's motivations have to gain the interest and empathy of your readers. A good motivation is one that makes the reader wonder what will happen to that character and what will that character do, because when the reader will want to keep reading. Because then the reader will want to keep reading. What you have to realize in the instance of shonen manga magazines is that those motivations will always be attuned with the reader's natural sense of ethics. The 3 principles of Shonen Jump are friendship, effort, and victory. Likewise, shonen manga readers will strongly empathize with what they feel is good and right, and will reject that which they feel is unethical. Because of this, characters such as Death Note's Light Yagami, who kills again and again, even if the targets of his assassinations are criminals themselves, require skillful techniques for the mangaka to win over the readers. On the reverse side, characters who are 100% virtuous can come across as fake and unlikable. To avoid this, you need to include in your main characters weaknesses or faults or more human desires. Even if your main character's motives are well defined, cowardly acts will still repulse your readers. This is mostly because cowardice is in direct opposition to the morality of your audience. Readers will never empathize with a gutless hero who sacrifices innocent bystanders to save his own life. Similarly, if your protagonist is in a tough situation because he blundered into it, your readers will judge the character as a fool and will only react with antipathy. Make a list of motivations. As an exercise, let's make a list of motivations that might evoke a reader's empathy and interest. Self-protection, of social status or prestige, feelings or memories, suppressing a scandal, hiding evidence of a crime. To protect a loved one, family or lover, friend, etc. Work, duty, patriotism. Curiosity, a mangaka looking for story ideas, a collector, a self-discovery. Vengeance, a passionate desire for revenge will evoke empathy. Desires for money, sex, love, power, etc. Pursuit of happiness, freedom of expression, political freedom, to become strong, to meet a hero, to make others laugh, to find something that is missing, etc., and many others. Beyond these, some motivations may pique a reader's interests even if they are not shared or understood, like wanting to collect women's hair or underwear. If you want to become a mangaka, I recommend you create a list of motivations. Not only will it be useful, When you go to create a character, it also may lead you to discover new motivations. To take an example from Terma Roma, okay, the desire to build a nice bath was a never before used, unique, yet eminently relatable motivation that ties into human life and history. Bravery begets empathy. Readers will most strongly empathize with motivations such as those listed above when your characters face their obstacle with bravery. Take that ultimate dilemma of a hero having to choose between either saving a child or a friend. Situations such as that present the best opportunity for a main character to display their bravery. I often have my characters display their bravery in my stories. In a similar dilemma, in Jojo's seventh story arc, Steel Ball Run, the villain, President Valentine, under attack by the hero Johnny Stand, begs Johnny to let him go and offers to bring him back Johnny's dead friend from another dimension. Johnny struggles with the choice whether he should bring his friend back to life or defeat his enemy. Readers are drawn by the suspense. They want to see how he will overcome this dilemma, and they will keep turning the pages in anticipation. Basic human desires as motivations. If you create a list of motivations, you'll probably notice that almost all stem from basic human desires. But keep in mind that, as I said above, in order to gain the empathy of your readers, you need agreeable motivations that conform to their natural sense of ethics. For example, if the motivation is a desire for wealth, you need to work it so that rather than being a simple robber, the character needs money in order to save someone else. Readers will be able to root for your main character's search for vengeance, despite it being an antisocial motivation when the goal is to take out an evil that is beyond the reach of laws or the authorities. The period drama television series Hisatsu's Sure Death provides a good example. The main characters are hired killers of bad people. And when the viewers begin to accept that their targets are so bad that getting the law involved just isn't necessary, the assassins take on the role of justice, and the audience becomes able to cheer them on. But if the viewers are given room to think, why not just go to the police? They are being selfish. Then revenge will fall apart as a motivation. Infidelity is also antisocial, but if you depict it not as just a raw sexual desire, but as something that is wrong, but a relatable temptation, readers will think, yeah, that's how it is. But this isn't going to end well for the two of them. The emotional connection will bring readers closer to the characters. A good example of this can be found in the movie Unfaithful 2002, where Diane Lane's character commits adultery. The allure of evil characters. On the other hand, humans aren't always pure and good, but carry an ugly side within themselves. It's just that in normal life, morals, laws, and other rules of the world keep those baser natures from display. When an evil character freely exhibits those normally hidden desires and acts in a way that the readers could not, the readers can find great catharsis. In the first story arc of Jojo, I always intended to make Dio look cool as he charged headlong down the villain's path, but I think it's due to the catharsis that some readers took the character with incredible zeal. By providing an outlet for the ugly feelings that we all share, you can depict a more lifelike range of emotions than those of only goodness. And in doing so, you can more effectively evoke readers' empathy. If you can create a truly evil character, your manga will become likely to become a classic. That said, being able to get readers to empathize with ugly desires is a tremendously tall hurdle, one that requires thought and planning to overcome. Once you have that ability, you could turn even a heartless killer into your main character. In Dio's case, I depicted him as coming from an unfortunate upbringing, saddled by a father who had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. I gave him a background that could explain his hunger for power and his willingness to become evil incarnate to obtain it. Dio wanted to get revenge upon the world for his terrible lot in life, even if it meant taking an evil path and committing deeds contrary to morality and law. In the end, I think the readers were able to accept that. Contrast the hero and the villain. No matter how compelling Dio was as an embodiment of evil, the protagonist of Jojo's first story arc was not him, but rather than the just Jonathan. Similarly to your main character must be fundamentally virtuous, on the side of justice. Justice is what justice is can be left up to personal interpretation. True to their friends and brave. These three qualities are to me the most beautiful manifestations of the human spirit, and the overwhelming majority of readers will empathize with and root for virtuous protagonists. If you set out to create an antagonist that is an opposite to the main characters, like Mitsuru Hanagata versus Hyuma Hoshi in Kyojin no Hoshi, Star of the Giants, the contrast between good and evil will be made more vivid. With Jonathan and Dio, I base the character off the duality between light and shadow, and use black and white contrast in my drawing to set them apart. But sometimes the difference between good and evil may depend on your reader's viewpoints. As I've grown older, I found out that good and evil are not so easily delineated. And I've taken more interest in the reasons why people do bad things. In the Jojo arc, Steel Ball Run, the major villain is the deeply patriotic President Valentine, and from that perspective, his stated goals may be more just. In fact, I suspect his intentions line up with those of our real-world leaders, but he's willing to sacrifice powerless people to achieve just ends, and that part of his character is, to the minds of the protagonist and the reader, unquestionably and unforgivably evil. Because of this, the character of President Valentine could never be the protagonist. I think this also serves as a good example of a point I made earlier, that readers won't empathize with the coward. Heroes fight alone. A protagonist must not only be virtuous, but a hero as well. And if there's one criterion for a hero, it's being alone. When protagonist is faced with an ultimate dilemma, it must be that only the protagonist can solve it, and the protagonist must solve it with their own abilities, which again, in essence, means being alone. In Jojo's fifth arc, Vento Aureo, the Bucciolati gang acts with a unified goal, but they are a collection of outcasts. Their connection is not that of a leader and follows or of a brotherhood, and when they fight, they each stand on their own. There may be nothing more beautiful than a person who pursues something important regardless of society's approval, and even if it means standing alone. The best heroes are like Jesus Christ. They may be praised by some, but they act not for personal gain and risk death in desolation and solitude, and they follow the call of truth within themselves. Those are the heroes. Clint Eastwood's leading roles embody this image of a hero. My father took me to see my first Eastwood film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1967, when I was in elementary school, and that image remained unchanged ever since. through Dirty Harry 1971, The Unforgiven 1992, and Gran Torino 2008. Fundamentally, characters who cannot fight without the aid of another can't be considered heroes. When audience sees someone dragging others into a fight, they can't help but think, hey, don't rely on others, do it yourself. Even when allies are present, when it comes to the fight, heroes have no one else to rely upon. Otherwise, they don't have what it takes to be heroes. Of my characters, the one who most markedly reflects the ideal of heroes is of Eastwood's roles is Jotaro Kujo of Jojo's third arc, Stardust Crusaders. Just in the way he stands, Eastwood projects a commanding presence backed by intelligence and discipline. As a character based on that image, so too does Jotaro, pose an intimidating figure just by standing with his hand in his pocket. The difference between the drawing men and women. Nowadays, both men and women can become heroes. Up until around 1980s, male characters had to be dynamic and take action, and female characters had to be delicate and passive. But now that's no longer necessary. I think this reflects a greater cultural shift. Macho women become permissible in movies like Linda Hamilton in Terminator 2, 1991. And audiences began accepting women who could take punches and even keep on fighting after being thrown over the edge of a cliff. In JoJo's sixth arc, Stone Ocean, I created a female protagonist named Jolene. And the only difference in the way I handled her as opposed to a male protagonist was not to draw her quite as beaten up, but she faces battles every bit as brutal as the male characters who came before. Presently, if anything sets apart a male and female character, it's only visual. This holds true for me as well. When I create new characters, I don't pay attention to differences between men and women, aside from possibility setting them apart through clothing or makeup, or sometimes including observations based on women around me, like when I wondered, how long is she going to dry her hair, or what is she doing in the bath for an entire hour? If there is no difference between male and female characters, you may be pondering how to decide when to use a female character. It's purely a matter of your own tastes, like take Yasuho Hirose from JoJo's 8th arc, Jojo Leon, whom I made as a variation on Koichi Hirose from the 4th arc, Diamond is Unbreakable. Koichi represented friendship, but I wanted to add romance to Jojo Leon, so I made the character a woman. I included many other female characters in Jojo Leon, but that was because I wanted to include elements of eroticism. I thought that with the relationship between the protagonist Josuke and Yasuho, I wouldn't be able to avoid such scenes, and I also wanted to challenge myself by attempting elements from genres I haven't yet done for Shōnen Jump. It even led me to draw bare breasts for the first time in my manga. If it doesn't matter if a character is female or not, some artists think that adding a woman might create an element of charm and therefore gain more popularity, but I'm not so sure I agree. I think that even if you're creating a manga that includes love and romance, you could have it be in between two male characters as long as that fits with your manga's world. As long as your characters are appealing, you could get away with a world of all men. You have nothing to fear. Character histories, the secret ingredient. When I'm creating a new character, before I do any drawing, I always write the character history. I have done so over 40 years since before JoJo appeared in print. To me, it's something akin to a chef's secret seasoning. It protects against inconsistencies in the character. For example, if a character is established as being unathletic, but in a fight he is suddenly nimble. It's like how you can look at a person's resume and see a gap between the years that causes you to wonder what that person was doing during that time, or how a wedding seating chart can tell you how much about the couple and their families. Why do these relatives have different surnames? Or I didn't know they had that many siblings, or the bride and groom sides are really unbalanced. And he's showing us a character history where it's like literally everything about the character: age, birthplace, blood type, weight. Maybe I should just paste these in here. I'll probably just do that so you guys can see as well. In a similar way, writing a character's history can help you visualize a character's intangible traits. It's critical that your readers understand your characters at a single glance. And as you write a character history, you will naturally form an image of how that character should be drawn. It may lead you to the story too, for example, when you come up with an answer to the fears section. You'll have a basis for a horror manga story. I got the idea to create these character histories from hearing out about preparations Hollywood actors do for their roles. An actor playing for the part of a police officer might go to a police academy and learn how to move and act like a real professional. The audience can tell in an instance whether something feels natural or not, and actors must strive to avoid giving performances that will shatter the suspension of disbelief. But when the details come across as real, they become a powerful tool to bring the role to life. With manga, if your editors have to ask you what a character is supposed to be, you haven't properly conveyed the character. To avoid this, you must have a sufficient grasp of the character for yourself. Some elements of mystery are, of course, acceptable, but you must have thorough understanding of what kind of person the character is. 60 facts to flesh out your characters. Not everything in a character's history sheet will end up on the pages of my manga, but it deserves a necessary base to determine how characters will react to situations in which I place them. My character histories include roughly 60 entries that cover a wide range of topics. I use the typical resume as a template, to which I've kept adding additional topics as needed to flesh out my characters. I start with the name, age, gender, followed by some basics, which will be necessary when it comes time to draw them, such as height and weight. Other subjects like birth date and blood type may seem of little importance, but can help form an image for the character's traits. Born in the summer, so maybe they like the sea. They're blood type A, so they're probably fastidious. I also always include a history of education. A character of poor learning might be a good source of gag humor, while a smart character presents a different set of options. I could play up a showy, arrogant side, or present an opportunity to put their cleverness to effect. I find favorite music to be indispensable when describing a character's traits, and whether or not a character has many pets, a dog, a lizard, and how they treat their pets can affect their character's personality and outlook on life. A little bit of a note that just traits to look in for humans in real life. It's crazy the attention to detail that these people put in. Whom the character admires is also important. If someone idolizes Clint Eastwood and want to be Clint Eastwood, that person might start wearing the same expressions. A character's relationship with their mother and father for another vital element for determining their personality. In order to answer all these questions, you need to have the knowledge and ideas to match. Matters unfamiliar to you personally can be studied by observing those around you, or even by reading books on medical science and psychology. Parents who act like this might have a child who ends up like that. You should always write down ideas as they come to you, and of any conversation that make your ears perk up. That way you can look it up later. You have to put in the work. Special abilities and finishing moves. The origins of stands. When I'm writing Jojo, I'll often think about the character stand, a personification of supernatural abilities common in the Jojo setting, before anything else, which means the first items I fill out on the history sheet will be that character's special moves and abilities. Let's say I think of a character who can stop time. I'll start here and see where that leads me. Do they need to be muscular to stop time? What about their appearance? Is there a kind of hairstyle that might have something to do with time? How would their relationship with time be reflected in the decor of their room, and so on? Some characters are primarily in the manga to fight, and in those cases, past wounds and surgical history become important entries that can suggest weaknesses they may or may not try to protect. As I fill in the gaps on a character's history sheet, appearance, hairstyle, and clothing become inseparable from personality, and by the end, I can draw a character who is recognizable from silhouette alone. I also have to consider what form a stand will take, and I'll consider absolutely any inspiration when finding a form that will match its powers. Sometimes it may be a familiar, everyday object, like a coffee cup. For a villain, I might turn to something that will provide a mood of the spiritual or unfamiliar, like African folk crafts. By the time I've added all the details, I end up being deeply attached to my characters. I've even cried when some have died, and as an author, I should probably be less emotional, but I can't help but feel affection for the characters whom I've put my heart into creating. Characters can change and be erased. After you begin writing and drawing a character for real, you may notice something you want to change. If that happens, you can go back and revise the history sheet, and of course, if your drawing isn't coming out the way you pictured it, you can always make changes. You will also inevitably run into dead ends during the character history step. If you determine that the character is not going to be someone you can use, you can make a clean break. Doing so only means the birth of a new character. If you have a large cast of characters, you may think it tedious to create history sheets for each and every one of them, but it's those sheets that will keep you from just going through the motions. If creating characters become rote, your manga may very well become rote too, and your readers will think you only make one kind of character. Without character histories, you could fall into a pattern, and that could be your end. Make a sample based on yourself and your friends. If you want to become a mangaka, then creating character histories is another skill you need to practice. Before making a sheet for your characters, try and make some based on yourself, your friends, your acquaintances, your families, your heroes. Let's say you're doing one for yourself. This calls for some self-inspection that you're probably not used to doing. What kind of person am I? What do I like? What do I fear? And so on. But as you fill in each blank, a character should begin to form. During this process, you must make sure you list weaknesses and not only strengths. When you're creating a sheet on personal hero, you may only be able to think of positives, and it might be difficult to think about any flaws or petty foible. I'm sorry, foibles. I never heard about this word. But by thinking of both the traits to which you aspire along with that person's weaknesses, you'll create a three-dimensional character. Those weaknesses lead to distress, which your character will make efforts to overcome. The most important part of making a character is to leave them room to grow. By depicting your character's efforts, you are depicting them growing as a person. This carries over into the story, but I'll cover that in the next chapter. How to differentiate your characters. When you first try making characters with this method, the first 2 or 3 will likely come easily, but the challenge comes with the 4th and beyond. Those are likely to become too similar to the first 3. In order to improve, you'll need to work to make deeper observations and stronger memories of your surroundings and your readings. I find that consulting various forms of pop divination, like blood type horoscopes and zoological fortune telling, it's called Dobutsu Uranai, can be highly instructive. During this step in the process, that's so fun. Something I never thought about. During this step of the process, you need to have a firm grasp on your characters of your protagonist, or else any side characters will also be indistinct. The basic way to differentiate your characters is to define your protagonists, then make your other characters so that they don't overlap. When filling out the history sheets, simply use different answers. For example, if your protagonist is Blood Type A, then you should have your supporting role be someone B or O. When making supporting characters, it's also important that they provide chemistry and contrast with the protagonist. If your main character is cheerful and possesses a strong sense of justice, a supporting character might be dark and cool-headed, with a slanted view of the world. In my first published manga, Poker Under Arms, I drew the antagonist in ways that contrasted with the main character. Black hair versus white, a light shirt versus dark coat, without a hat versus with one, thick eyebrows versus narrow, and so on. This remains true if your manga has a larger cast. Just keep on making sure that your supporting characters have a different appeal than the protagonist. In terms of body type, you can have some be fat, some skinny, some muscular, some tall, some short, and so on. You have complete freedom. It can be interesting to have a character that is almost identical to your main character, except for a few minor differences. When creating your characters, you don't have to approach your protagonist and supporting roles differently. The major difference is that supporting roles don't have the same restrictions as the main character. While you can't let your protagonist become disliked by the readers, supporting roles can be backstabbers or the like. You can be free to make them unlikable or even detestable. Surprisingly, those sorts of characters sometimes become the most popular. You only need to be careful not to let the supporting character outshine your protagonist. How to use supporting characters. The principal way to handle two supporting characters is to have them overcome their flaws. In this way, you can connect with their readers. For example, a solitary character who has trouble making friends might gradually forge friendships. Another common pattern is an antagonist who gradually becomes friends with the main character. Sometimes supporting characters can grow in unexpected ways. My character Rohan Kishibe, who appears in Jojo's 4th arc, Diamond is Unbreakable, and other works, was not originally intended to be an important character, but when I started drawing him, I liked how he turned out, and so began utilizing him more often through the story. In the design process, I had developed him enough to make sure he didn't overlap with Josuke or Koichi, who were the major characters in personality, the more major in personality, quirks, or visual design, but Rohan's character expanded due to their elements in the story, such as the town of Morioh, where Josuke lives, and the friendships Rohan found there. Names with rhythm. When making your history sheets, you need to choose your characters' names with much care, for their names can determine the direction they'll take. Just as with naming a child, thinking up names for your characters can be a fun activity on its own. Just be aware that unconventional names can reveal a parent's style and values. But after 102 names, it's not all fun and games. If you just choose names that have kanji you like after so many characters, you will without doubt fall into a pattern. You need to bring craft into the process, like Noriaki Kakyoin, where I used the name of a location in Sendai, a city with a hometown feel. Sometimes you may want names that are intentionally similar. If my character Rohan, and then he puts the kanji, had a brother, I might flip through a kanji dictionary to find related kanji. Maybe something that shares the kanji that Rohan has in the name, to signal that the two are brothers. Another method is to use similar sounding names like Oingo and Boingo in Jojo's third story arc. I don't usually set out to give my antagonists evil sounding names, but many manga villains have their names like Mataro, evil boy, that evoke images of death, darkness, and the underworld. You can also use royal sounding names like something Stein or something Berg, or for characters whom you might seem high class. Try to be cognizant of the image of your potential names imply. How to draw characters, Jotaro Kujo. The most popular of my leading characters is Jotaro, the protagonist of Jojo's third story arc, Stardust Crusaders. When I started on this arc, my primary goal was to create characters with different personalities from those in arcs 1 and 2, and so I narrowed the focus on the first chapter of Jotaro to Jotaro himself. On his character history sheet, I wrote that his father was a Japanese jazz musician and his mother was Joseph's daughter, Holly Joestar. Aside from a brief scene with the mysterious coffin from the conclusion of the first arc, which I included to foreshadow Dio's revival, the contents of Jotaro's character sheet, including his family history, formed the entire first chapter of Stardust Crusader. For this opening chapter, my only concern was to develop the character and his history. It begins with when he was a child and he was obedient and adorable and said things like, nothing's, paste the manga pages. Nothing's as good as your cooking, Mom. As he grew older, he started saying things like, shut up, can't you get out of my face, woman? After that, we find him in a jail cell. These opening 3 pages left a lot of questions open for the readers, but as the creator, I felt reassured that the arc was on the right track. In order to restrain violent abilities that were beyond his control, Jotaro puts himself in jail and even tries to kill himself, but an unknown force stops him. This unusual opening is a perfect example of the Jojo world. Also because the more secure his jail was, the more weight there would be behind Jotaro's actions. I put a great care into drawing the cell with strong metal bars and other such details. The first Jojo arc is set in 1888 and the second in 1938. For the third, I continued on to 1988, exactly 100 years after part 1. I put Jotaro in a Gakuran-style uniform to make it immediately evident that the setting was contemporary and that Jotaro was a delinquent. This is an example of how I communicate multiple pieces of information through the way I draw the characters and settings, and I did the same for the scenes of younger Jotaro and his family. Arcs 1 and 2 were set overseas, but by depicting Jotaro's house as a typical Japanese home, I could inform the readers that the story was set in Japan without having to stop to explain it. The name Jotaro combined my JoJo naming style with the meaning of successor or heir. To compare him with the protagonist of the series up to that point, Jonathan from the first story arc was a man of justice in a very traditional sense, and Joseph from the second arc was cheerful and flashy. In contrast, Jotaro kept his emotions hidden aside, no shouts of surprise or boisterous laughter. I made an effort to draw him as expressionless as I could. I took a page from my ideal image of a hero, Clint Eastwood, and gave him an economy movement and a presence that could be felt just by him standing. I carried his characterization through all of part 3. Jotaro was taller and his body had more of a sense of weight than my previous protagonist, but I had established that in fact in the character sheets, and all I had to do was draw him as I'd already decided. I made him as tall as I did to evoke an air of the fantastic, while his school uniform represented the everyday. When creating a new character, the first thing that must be decided upon is that character's motivations, but Jotaro's don't appear in the manga until the chapter 7, when his mother, Holy, is endangered by Dio's reappearance. Jotaro usually pays little heed to his troublesome mother, but when she collapses, he is called to action. The outwardly gruff young man reveals the kindness that lies hidden beneath. Strong characters are the key to serials. As I close off this chapter, I want to impress upon you that characters are essential to a serialized manga, and that a serialized manga is an absolute necessity for sustaining a career as a mangaka. When I made my debut with Poker Under Arms, the reaction it received from the editors was simply, "We can't make this a serial." Though I'd finally broken into the industry, the editorial team wanted manga they could serialize. I realized that the suspense-driven shorts I had been making up until then weren't going to make the cut, and I found myself blocked by another wall. Thrillers don't work for one reason. The most important component of a serialized manga is having an appealing protagonist, but thrillers, as a genre, place emphasis on the story, and their characters tend to be weak. I had intentionally decided to debut with a western because few other mangaka were making them, but I felt like the choice had immediately labeled me as of something of an oddity, and that I was already assumed to be incapable of creating a serial. The works I loved, mystery thrillers, ninja stories, and so on, and not just limited to manga, but movies and novels as well, start with a violent conflict up front, and only later reveal the cause. But those aren't the more easily digested big hits. At the time, Star Wars 1977 was wildly popular, but I prefer Carrie 1976 and its tale of a girl with supernatural powers who extract ferocious revenge upon her parents and bullies. I was well aware that what I liked and what became smash hits were two different things, but even knowing that, I couldn't shake my desire to remain true to the things that I personally enjoyed and that I thought were good, and not to hew to what was currently in vogue. Making a living as a mangaka. Soon after my debut publication, I realized that the manga I had been creating could not become serials, and I quickly learned that if I couldn't make the serials, I couldn't make a living as a mangaka. At the time, a mangaka could earn about 3,500 yen, $18 or about $45 in 2017 dollars per page, which after taxes came out to about 3,000 yen, so 15 or about $40 in 2017 dollars. Poker Under Arms was 31 pages, which only amounted to about 100,000 yen, $450 or about $1,200, $1,200 in 2017 dollars. But even with the low page count, manga takes considerable time. I spent about a month working on Poker Under Arms, but the prospect of earning a mere 100,000 yen a month was clearly untenable. Working part-time as I created a manga was an option, but if I was to call myself a mangaka, I wanted to be able to sustain myself from my craft alone. I tried to think analytically about what I needed to do, what I wanted to do, the kind of world I enjoyed, and didn't quite fit in the big hits. But if I wanted to make a living as a mangaka, I needed to be one who could turn his publishers a profit. Ideally, I could be able to create a hit manga within the realms that I liked. But my first goal needed to be to create something steady, and sure, that could keep me afloat. Once I managed that, I would find time between deadlines to work on minor passion projects. At the time I was starting out, the most popular mangaka produced their big hits somewhere around their late teens, like the duo of Yude Tamago, who debuted at age 16, or Yoichi Takahashi, who was making Captain Tsubasa. He was around 19. That meant by breaking into the profession at age 20, I was a bit far behind in the game. When I compared myself to those accomplished creators, I couldn't let myself become idle. I was compelled by a sense of urgency. I had to get a serial in Shōnen Jump as soon as possible. Sherlock Holmes' Guardian Angel. Figuring out how to get from previous suspense-driven short manga to a serial was a process of trial and error, but I knew that I couldn't just model my protagonist after someone who was already popular, because my editors would have no interest in the familiar. Overcoming that hurdle was to be my next objective. I finally landed upon a character that felt right when I came up with Cool Shock BT, which became my first serialized manga. On a basic level, the manga would be compared with Sherlock Holmes, with the protagonist BT in Holmes' role and his buddy Koichi taking Watson's part. I emulated the structure of Dr. Watson as the narrator and used Koichi to propel the story. In Poker Under Arms, I also used a narrator to move the story along, and with the Cool Shock BT, I thought that letting Koichi serve as the narrator would deepen the sense of mystery surrounding BT and attract the reader's interest. I made BT distant from Holmes by making him a rascal of a boy. Much like Holmes, BT is a genius using his wits to overcome evildoers, but in my version of the protagonist is a bad boy who uses his intellect to outdo his opponents and win through trickery. I aimed for a theme of evil defeating evil. At the same time, I took the roles of the antagonists who would typically be motivated by easily understood concepts like greed or wounded pride, and fill them with more unusual characters whose motives were harder to figure out. BT was published in the 1980s amid a growing wave of vicious, incomprehensible crimes, which resulted in those kinds of character feeling contemporary and new. Resistance to a Devil Boy. BT was published as a one-shot, but I intended it to be serial. Still, I struggled to obtain the go-ahead to move past the planning stage, and it took around 2 years before I managed it. A major reason for this was pushback from the editorial team. No other manga in Shōnen Jump featured a rule-breaking character like BT. That was a challenge I wanted to take on. But the response I got was that a Devil Boy had no place in a wholesome shonen manga magazine that held to the principles of friendship, effort, and victory. Even the name BT was a point of contention. By using 2 English initials, I was going for an air of mystique and something fresh. But the editors merely found it incomprehensible. But my manga's basis on a classic like Sherlock Holmes gave me a peculiar confidence, and I thought that if they were criticizing my manga without even understanding where I was coming from, they must surely be wrong. I felt as if Sir Conan Doyle was at my side, and I continued drawing the series and made the stockpile of stories despite not having secured a serialized publication. Unless I obtained the go-ahead, they would never see the light of day. Luckily, the editor assigned to me understood my way of thinking and was my persistent advocate. In the end, the resistant editors got tired of saying no, and BT finally had his serial. How I learned the right way to make a successful manga. Though I had finally started out my first serialized manga, Cool Shock BT did not find popularity. Believing my characters and story to be good enough, I struggled with the questions of why readers weren't accepting my manga. After the results of a survey given after BT's third appearance, even my supported editor lost confidence in the series' continuation. But another survey sent out after the final chapter to the then cancelled serial showed that readers rated the ending highly. Even though the series lasted a mere 10 issues, BT was sorely missed by many readers. I met with my editor to get the bottom of what was so different about the last chapter of a series and had otherwise been met with indifference. What we came up with was the introduction of a strong antagonist, in this instance a creepy, freckled boy. The boy appears without a warning and carries out merciless schemes that drive Koichi's family into terror and dismay. Up to that point, BT's adversaries had all been big men who posed physical threats, but this creepy boy possessed a ruthless intellect that gave chills to BT, who had been well established as a genius trickster himself. BT has his first worthy opponent. The heightened suspense drew readers into the conflict between him and the creepy freckled boy. Another important difference was that in the final chapter, BT was fighting for the sake of his friend for the first time. BT still used underhanded tricks to best his opponent, but by choosing to give him the motivation of fighting for his friend, I brought him in the line with the royal road of shonen manga. What I think happened was that their friendship naturally developed over the course of several stories. In a way, it felt like I had been forcing the stories at the beginning, but by the end, BT was fighting to protect his friend, as if the alternative was unthinkable. Cool Shock BT was over, but thanks to its popular final installment, I gained a deeper understanding of how to make a popular manga. Afterward, I left Sendai for Tokyo, and my career and journey as a mangaka began in earnest. Damn, I think, yeah, that was chapter 3. That was a long one, guys. But truly inspiring. So I'm glad we got through this. Sorry if I messed up some of the names. I have not read Jojo, through my utmost shame. But I am surely probably going to do it after I finished reading this book by Araki Hirohiko. And I encourage everyone else to do so if they have the time. But yeah, you're probably here because you want to become a mangaka. Let me know if you want me to publish more of these readings. I'm definitely just gonna keep on reading. This was like very good lecture for myself as well. And yeah, I wish you a good rest of the day slash night, and take care, everyone. I hope this was enjoyable for you guys. Bye bye.